All right, what's good? What's going on? Good morning. Welcome, Christmas Day. Let's see if we can do a little bit of a recap here, see what was going on in the market this week. We can also take a look at some of the moves that we made this week, see what we may have as some ideas for next week. It's going to be another shortened week. We've got New Year's Day, so market will be closed during that. If there's anything in particular you guys want to take a look at, just let me know. Just put it right in the chat, and we'll do that. So let's get this show going. All right, so we'll start here with SPX, or the S&P 500. So let's go back. Let's take a look at how the week started for us. So Monday morning, we had the news that came out that the stimulus bill was passed. It was a sell the news type of event. What we ended up seeing was that the market gapped down and drove lower early on Monday morning. However, if you guys remember, it was an interesting day in that throughout that morning, you had Microsoft, it was green, Amazon was green, the banks were green as well, which we'll take a look at. So all of these being green was really suspicious on whether or not this was truly going to be a drive lower. You know, it's hard to get the market lower when you've got the banks, which were heavily positive, when you've got Amazon, which was green, which you've got Microsoft, which was green. These are all heavy hitters. Now the banks, they were green on Monday because on Friday, the Federal Reserve came out and said that they were okay with banks restarting buybacks. So if they start buying back their shares, that's going to make their stock prices go up, and associated with that, the market. So overall, you know, as we'll go through all the charts, you know, I would be, you know, cautiously bullish is my take on the market right now. It's a little bit tentative because breakouts have been false, breakdowns have been false. It's kind of been a lot of chop. So we'll need to see further clarity that's going to be incoming. But before that, let's just go ahead and jump right in. So we had that drive lower, and then you saw they just bought it right back. You know, this was clear as could be that based on that, there were no sellers at all in this market. So they drove it right back in, and then the rest of the week has been nothing but chop. So if we think about this, you know, what could we do as an opportunity? You know, what we were doing early in the week, and here we'll just look at the SPY because this is easier to trade. If you look at this, once we had this pullback, once we started to balance in here within this 368 to 369 range, you know, this would have been a great place where we could look at, you know, seeing if next week market is chopping around, could we do anything right there in the 368, 369 range for collecting premium? What I would be looking at is possibly coming in, could we sell an iron fly right? So you set it up. I'd sell a 369 call, a 369 put. If we look at it, 369's marking a $1.10 on the call side and about a $1.30 on the put side. So it's about 240. So what we would be looking to on the width of this iron fly is probably looking to go about $3 out. So if we go 372, 366, you can see here we could collect $1.70 credit for a $3 wide. Now this is only if we start to see that the market next week is just balancing. And the nice thing about the SPY is that you can see they have not only just end of the week options, but you have options that are going to expire throughout the week. So for example, here you have one expiring on Monday. Here you could see you have one expiring on Wednesday, and then ultimately, throughout the rest of the week. So you've got a lot of options when it comes to, the SPY, and I actually like trading these earlier on in the week because a lot of times when you just have flat days, this is a really nice way to collect some nice, quick and easy premium. So if we look at a longer term chart, how do things look? So coming back on a daily, going back 6 months, you see we've had this several month consolidation, and we've just now started to break out of that. And we've been building, another consolidation here as well. So what we would be looking at is, if we get a breakout here above 372, then we got to be looking at, this being a potential go. Now, the issue here is that you guys also got to take into consideration that it could be a false breakout. We got to stay on our toes, because if we look above and then we fall back into this range, then we could be looking at, targeting the midpoint of this range as a potential false breakout. On the alternative, you may have, a breakdown. Let's say we get below this gap, which was here, and this gap, which was filled, and then it was retested and then bought right back up. Any look down below this, then we could see as a potential breakdown. So another scenario could be, let's say we end up losing the 20-day simple moving average. If we break down below that, then targeting here the bottom of this balance area, which also would coincide to the bottom of this gap at 363, that could be, a nice possible play for us. So what about the NASDAQ? How did the NASDAQ look this week? So let's pull up that chart. So similarly, NASDAQ came down on Monday morning, just like the S&P did. And then this was strong right off the gates. Microsoft, Amazon, they were green. And this just got bought right back up, and then it's just gone sideways. This is another place here. If we see that it's another balancing week, or early on it's balancing, we can be looking at seeing if we could collect any premium by selling in this area. Let's take a look at a longer term chart. Let's look at daily over 6 months. This has been real technical. You can see it's very similar to the S&P. We had this several month consolidation that was going on here. Ultimately, we've broken out. We've came back in, tested the 20. It got bought right back up, and now it's here in this balance area. So it looks like as long as we stay above 303, we're good for, a potential move higher. And then we're just looking at whether or not we can break out above this shelf here. How about if we take a look at now the Russell? So the Russell, you could see here on the weekly, had that gap down, and this has been much stronger than the SPY and the QQQ if you take a look at it. Whereas the others really got back in a range and just went sideways. This has just been strong, and this has been strong here for, several months now. You could see there has been no test here of the 20. I personally think that, I would be careful with this. It's due for a bit of a pullback. It's not to say that it will happen, but if it does, then we've got a nice clear target where you see, if it needs to come back and test the 20, that's always there as a possibility. So let's take a look at some of, Fangman plus T. So Fangman plus T is Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, Tesla. Looking at Facebook, just looking back, on a daily, going back to 6 months, this really doesn't have much clarity whatsoever. You could see this has just been in this large area of consolidation, just bouncing around sideways. Doesn't really look that good, but we'll see what happens. You can see they've been buying up here at this point. If you end up seeing any weakness that occurs, it's possible we could come down and we could test 245. So, we keep an eye out. Always got to maintain all possibilities that could exist out there. And this is potentially one of them. How about Apple? Apple to me looks to be the strongest of Fangman plus T. So if you take a look at it, on Monday we had that drop. They bought it right back out. And then here on Tuesday, this is when the news came out that Apple may be going into the car making business. So that would be really interesting if that happens. They could be rivaling Tesla with some battery technology. My personal thought is that Apple, for the past several years, has been stagnating. They haven't really been innovating with respect to their phones. Their latest Macs with the M1 chip, that looks pretty interesting. That looks very promising. However, overall, if you look at, the new AirPods, $550 for something that's really not that revolutionary. But I think that, if behind the scenes they've actually been diverting their resources and creativity towards a bigger move, which is certainly possible. I mean, this is, one of the largest companies in the world, and they likely have the engineering and foresight to be able to look ahead several years. If they've been behind the scenes working on and planning, putting together an electric vehicle, then that may be something that ends up taking this, much, much higher. So when that news came out, we had this gap, and then we had a go, and then we had a pullback. You could see this gap was not filled whatsoever. And once we saw that, to me, this looks like it's just bullish. No one here was looking at getting this down a touch and fill this gap. And it's really just consolidated this move. If we look back here on the daily, we've had, again, just like the other, FANG stocks, it's just been consolidating, and then we've had this breakout. So we had this big move down off the all-time high, and then you could see with this consolidation, we've just now started to break out. And we may end up just filling this sideways, but ultimately, to me, it looks like this may be setting itself up easily for, a move up to the all-time highs. So that's something that we need to be looking at, considering, with some sort of play with verticals or butterflies. But if this truly is something that's going to be moving, due to the possibility of an electric vehicle, then we got to look into the consideration of this going even much higher. So what could we be looking at doing for this? Certainly looking out into January. You could see that we've got positions on in January. Long call butterflies. We've got the 130, 150, 170 in play. So we're targeting up to, not only the all-time high, but potentially even further. And certainly going out even into February, we've got some size going into even beyond that with long calls. Really the idea there is going to be to see if we can finance these call butterflies here with a nice pop in any move here in Apple, close out those long calls that are out of the money. It's unlikely that those are going to go in the money, but you never know. But really, we just want to see if we can reduce the debit that we had here in these long calls. So Netflix, if we take a look at this, really no need to even look on a weekly. This has just been Chop City here for several months. It's a premium seller's dream. If you look at it, we had this gap down. We came back, we filled the gap. We weren't able to get any traction and move any higher, and we've fallen back into this range. So I don't really see anything that's here that we should be looking into. I'll personally just avoid this. What about Amazon? So Amazon, similarly, you could see this has just been Chop City as well for several months, just going sideways. This has been a nice move that we've had, that we've been selling some premium on this at 3,200, both for this week as well as for next week. We've had some nice plays on that, collected several bucks of premium on it, And if we end up seeing that things are just choppy again, this just may have to rinse and repeat. There's no reason not to. Where would we be looking at it to see if we're going to have any sort of move? First move would be above 32.50. If we see that we're ultimately going to move above 32.50, and it may not be clean where we're just there and it happens, we just may wake up one morning and it's just gapped above that. But if that's the case, we got to be looking at something here at least to 33.70 and also potentially also to 3,500. So Amazon is due to report its earnings out in February. Traditionally, what it's done is it's had a move up into the earnings. So we certainly could be looking into making a play for that move up into the earnings. It's a holiday season. Everyone's been ordering everything online. So, I think that there's going to be a lot of people making a play for this to move higher. What about Microsoft? Microsoft has been showing some strength. This may be setting up to be something like Apple, where if we see it move above 225, I think we got to be looking at targeting here out to 230, if not 235, with some longer dated moves. Microsoft's been strong, and this looks like it's setting up for some strength. So what about Tesla? Let's take a look at how this has been working this week. So Tesla got added to the S&P 500 officially on Monday. You could see that was a sell the news type of event. It's gone lower, and then they ended up buying it back, and it's gone back right into range. So what's this 614 coincide with? If we look back on the daily, you could see this was a nice clear touch right here on the 20. If anyone is out there and they were, looking at that as a potential buy point, that looked pretty nice. And you see we've moved right back above here what was the previous all-time high, right around 650. So if we stay above this, then I think that just looks like it's setting up nicely for staying long and, looking to see if there's any plays that could be done with even some weekly in the money call verticals. So how about the chip stocks? These have been taking a breather. NVIDIA, you could see this has really just been chopping around sideways. Nothing that's been going on here for over a month. This to me is not something that I feel overly interested in engaging with. It just looks like it's going to go sideways possibly. But if we see that it breaks down or if it breaks out, that's when we look to make the move. So how about Google? Google had some news that came out with some antitrust rules, suits that were coming out by several states. And what you could see here is it came down. It wasn't able to fill this gap. Came down, touched the 50, and it's bounced just slightly. Hasn't been really a strong bounce. So my take on this is that I would be cautious on this with any sort of buys. This could very easily soften up and then easily come down and start to try to fill this gap. So looking at this, if we see that it's going to break down below the 50, then we got to be looking to see if it's going to start trying to fill in this gap. We don't need to fill that whole gap, targeting something in the middle, 1675. So how could that be structured? Looking at that, maybe something like a 1700, 1675 call vertical, that's about $7 for, about an 18-point gain. Let's take a look at AMD. This relative to NVIDIA has been showing more strength. It's broken out above its all-time high, but then come back into range. I think if we see it bouncing above here, 95, that looks like it could be something that we're going long again. Let's take a look briefly at some of the banks. This was based off of that news that came out here. You could see with the gap up. Now, banks have been strong here for a few months. This just looks strong. This looks bullish. I don't see any reason here to be getting in the way of this. But, if I were going to be thinking about looking into anything in the banks, I would probably be looking at getting long. Adobe, there was a nice move here in Adobe this week where we were just selling some premium at 500 on the pin. So if we go back here and looking out throughout the week, you could see it's just been chopping around. We made, $1.50 off of this and just selling the 500 calls and puts via an iron fly. So what about Shop? Shop was really interesting this week. So let's go back. Let's look at this here on the daily. once it broke out here, over this 1200, that looked like a clear buy. So what we did was, before this breakout was happening, we weren't expecting here an 80-point move in a single day. But what we were thinking was, could there be any sort of, consolidation around 1200, big round number. We sold some premium at the 1200 via an iron fly and actually ended up closing it despite the shop moving, higher for, a small profit. But we used some of those proceeds to fund a long call butterfly going out to next week. That long call butterfly was 1200, 1300, 1400. And with that, what we found is that we were able to make a nice profit of, about $5 off of that. We could have waited longer and potentially collected a little bit more, but there's no reason to get greedy. We did well with it, and, we'll lock it in and move on to the next move. So let's take a look at what else do we have here on our watch list that we could be looking at. Fubo. This was, meme stock of the week. This was getting an upgrade early on. This parabolic move got up to over 60, then ultimately ended up getting a downgrade with a gap down and a move lower. This isn't something that I personally see as being a viable play. This is just moving back and forth much too much for my liking. Let's just see what the options look out into January. If we're looking out into January, there's some decent, open interest in the call and put side that we can see. So people are out there making plays on this, but this isn't something that I would be looking into. So that's about all that I have here for you guys this morning. If there's anyone here in the chat and you have any questions, feel free to post anything up. Give you guys a moment to hear if there's anyone who's got anything that they're asking me to look at. All right. If we got nothing else that you guys want to hear about, then what I would say is, have a good Christmas. We're going to shut this down here, and we'll see you guys on the next one.